Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm very excited to talk with our guest today. Toriann Perkey is a mother, a mentor, and a teacher. She began homeschooling in 2004 when her oldest was 3, and now sometimes wonders where the time went as 3 of her 4 children have graduated and are attending college. Through the years, she has led each of her children, along with hundreds of additional students, to discover, celebrate, and prepare for the unique role that each came to Earth to play. Since 2008, Toriann has empowered homeschooling at all sorts of families, not just homeschooling families, to feel confident and successful as they liberate their kids' education through interactive workbooks and online programs. She currently serves as the director of English for the Independent Education Program, where she teaches English and writing to homeschool students ages 12 to 18. Toriann lives in Orem, Utah with her husband, Josh, and their one remaining homeschool teen. And you can find more content on her YouTube channel, Homeschool to Homeschool.
I know.
And all of her contact information, I'm going to put it all in the show notes so that y'all can reach out, that you can check out her YouTube channel. Toriann, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I am very excited to be here. This is going to be I'm just honored that you asked me, and I'm excited to talk to you and share some things today.
Well, it's my pleasure to have you. I am now an extra people. It's my pleasure to have you. Let's talk about what made you take the plunge when your oldest was 3, because you are a teacher.
Yeah, well, so that in itself is an interesting question. I remember being in high school and people would say, "What do you want to be?" And I'd say, "Well, I think I want to be a teacher." And then I went to college, and ironically, I didn't want to get a teaching degree. So I had this brilliant idea that I was going to go teach in a private school because you didn't have to have a teaching degree. At least that's what I'd been told. So I majored in Latin because I figured there weren't a lot of Latin teachers around. And sorry, my phone just went off. And then so I loved public school. I thrived in public school, and it was a really positive experience for me. And so when people would say to me before my kids were born and after I had them, and my first one was little, "Are you going to homeschool?" Which 20 plus years ago, people were asking that question, but I think it's a different, the culture's different now about it.
Yeah.
But they would ask me and I would say, "Oh, no way. I am never homeschooling. That's why you send your kids to school so you get free time." I was an adamant no, and I was like, homeschoolers are weird. I'd had 2 experiences with homeschool people. One lived in my neighborhood and they never let their kids outside. They were the shutters were drawn. And when I did see those kids at church, they were super awkward and weird. I was like, no way. And then the other kid I knew, so I only knew 2 homeschool kids or 2 families. The other one had come to public school for choir. And I just remember watching him and thinking, "You're socially awkward. You academically do nothing at home. You just play video games all day. You think you're all that," because he would do things and I would look at him and he'd say, "Look at this. This is amazing. I'm going to be X." And I would look at it and say, "There's no way." He just had so little awareness. So I was like, there is no way I'm doing that.
Yeah.
But you know how things go. I had a friend who started to research it. Back then you read books in the library because the internet was just barely a thing. So there weren't really blogs even to read. So I'm reading books in the library and I'm looking at my daughter. So I like to say my daughter just came out different. She, if some kids, they say they come out dancing to a different tune. I like to say she was off in the corner tap dancing. I don't know what, she was just so different. And by 3, I knew that she was different enough that I was concerned that school was going to be just odd for her. It was going to be hard, I could tell. And as I read about what you could do with school and how, everything I was reading is you can customize the education and then and after you tailor it. And then I was reading about these amazing stories of what homeschool kids then go on to achieve. And of course, I was really drawn to the fact they're studying Latin in elementary school and, all these things and, reading classics and poetry and all this stuff. So I was like, okay, let's give it a try. And it was, I don't care when you start, whether you're starting and you're pulling your kids out when they're in high school or middle school because you're worried about what's happening in the school system, or if you've decided to homeschool, but it's, your kid's a kindergartner, it is scary. Because even after all these years, I hear the same things. My what happens if I fail my kids? Like what if I ruin them? What if they can't get into college? What if I can't teach math? What if I can't teach them how to write an essay, right? All these things. So that's where we started. What I didn't know at the time is that it turned out that my kids, all four of them, were going to have what I like to call the alphabet soup of letters of learning, whether you say disabilities or differences. So we have, amidst all four of them, we have depression and anxiety, we have ADD, we have dyslexia, we have autism, and probably some other things that are a little less common. And I didn't know that the reason my oldest was different is because she just had raging ADD, ADHD. I just didn't know that that's how it would manifest in her. And then as my other kids came along, it became obvious that the reasons that we needed to homeschool, because I felt led, right? Like I'm a religious person and I felt like it wasn't just a good idea. I also felt like I was being led to it, even though I was terrified.
Yeah.
So taking the plunge for me was a leap of faith. But I trusted that it would somehow work out. And I didn't know how important it would be for all of my kids for different reasons because of the variety of things that then came along. So for us, even though we are lifelong homeschoolers that never stepped foot in a public school system, for me, it is easy for me to see moments where I'm like, I think my kid would have been okay in public school, right? From a social place. And then other times where I'm like, oh, this would have been a train wreck for them, right? And it would, every year it was back and forth. And there's pros and cons, right? So there are things I say, you know what? Maybe public school would have been better for this reason for this kid, but we've more than compensated. And I feel like I'm in a safe place to say that homeschooling worked because we launched or are in the process of launching a lot of kids, right? Like 4 is a good number. And every kid's been different and their launch has been different. Their route to college has been different based on their situation. So my journey, that's what it looks like. I tried doing public school at home for a little bit. When my oldest was 7, I was like, oh, we should probably get serious and actually use curriculum. And that lasted 3 weeks and she was crying and I was crying. So we became we tried a lot of different things. It started to look a lot more traditional the older they got in a very customized way. And, the big question I would always get is how do you socialize them? Although I feel like that question is different now than it was 20 years ago because there's a lot more people who look normal and are homeschoolers, right? Like, I'm not going to lie. You can't always pick a homeschooler out of the crowd anymore, but you used to be able to. So things have changed a lot. And, I used to get that question a lot. And so that was also a thing we had to figure out is how do we make sure our kids can navigate being socially, they can handle being socially kind and loving, but also graceful in society. That's really important. So I don't know. I love the fact that the journey is the proof, right? I used to, when I was a younger mom, and especially as my oldest was starting to get to 12, 13, and I started realizing high school was looming on the horizon, which means it's one step from college. I remember just being starved for talk. I wanted to go talk to anybody who had successfully finished because it's one thing to homeschool elementary school. It's another to try to think about doing it in a way that actually has to launch them. And so I wanted people who had done it successfully to tell me how, so I could feel like it was possible. And I would look at their children and I think, okay, that makes it seem like this is a good idea. And I feel like I sit in a place now where I am on the other side of that fence, where I can say it is possible. And I know lots of kids who have launched successfully who were homeschooled all the way through high school. And there's so many ways to do it. And anyway, so my journey, I hope, is an opportunity to show that it can be scary and you don't do it perfectly. I have regrets as well as things I'm so happy we did it that way. But at the same time, I feel like the proof is in my kids and the fact that they are on their way to being contributing, happy, successful adults. So there you go.
That.
That's our story.
Now, out of curiosity, what are each of them going into of the 3?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the oldest is currently majoring in landscape design, which is, if you need to landscape your yard or build a deck and you want to hire someone to help you design, do that. That's her. And it's fun because even though she had lots of interests, she always loved plants. She always loved being outside. So she kind of took her time figuring that out. She started at one school that was a little bit easier to get into and then transferred into probably one of the most prestigious schools in the state of Utah.
Wow.
So she's there and doing that. And then my second is actually, he is a dancer. He loves to do all kinds of dance. He is majoring in dance, and he's at a school in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So he's across the country. And he is a great example of someone who, I mean, I didn't think he'd ever go to college. He didn't take the ACT. He just basically focused on dance. And now he is doing very, very well out there in that school. And it's a full school. So it's not just dance. It's also liberal arts. So he's taking regular classes, and proof that any kid can go to college. That's what I like to say. Any kid can go to college if they want to. And then the third is at school doing illustration. So she is majoring in illustration. And my last who is just in the process of applying, he is currently saying he'll do game design, but we'll see. He will probably end up somewhere else because things tend to change as they're there. So all over the map. Yeah, it's fun to go from being in charge of a curriculum and in charge of an education to kind of watching them really embrace their own choices.
Oh, I love that.
Go their own routes.
That's so cool. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about, because you are a writing teacher and you're the director of English at the Independent Education Program. Let's move into writing with kids. Now, how can we help our kids become better writers? Because I know that's like, we tend to be eclectic unschoolers, but with that being said, I'm like, kids, you have to be able to read, write, and do math, and know American history and the government and the Constitution. Beyond that, you can do what you want, but if you can read, write, do math, and you understand how our government works, you'll be fine. So let's dive into, like, how do we become better at helping our kids with writing? Because I think that's a big question on everyone's mind.
It is. And what's really interesting, so let me give you just a little bit of my background with writing so you can understand where I'm coming from. So I loved English and writing. I didn't major in it in college, but I did a lot of stuff there. And I actually did a minor in publishing and editing.
Wow.
So not in addition to sort of the creative writing and the analysis that comes with literature, I was also steeped in kind of the rules of writing, as we talked about that. And so I had that as a foundation. And then for a while, and then I did some educational curriculum design and things like that in my experience as well. I worked in textbooks for a while before I had kids. So I have a lot of background in a variety of things, including instructional design, which is, instructional design is the idea of how do you teach someone how to do something, which I think is fascinating, because it's one thing to say they need to learn X, Y, or Z. It's another, like, what's the process, right? So then as my kids got older and I started to say, oh, you should probably know how to do an essay, or you should probably know how to type, or whatever, depending on the age, especially as they got into the middle school and high school ages. We happen to be involved in a co-op, which I'm assuming your listeners know what that is. A group of moms come together and teach each other. And I started to say, hey, can I teach a class on writing this? Or can I teach a class on doing literary analysis discussions or whatever? So over the years, and so it's probably been 12 years now, I started to practice because I wanted my kids to have that. So I started looking for those opportunities. And then the more I did, the more I got steeped in the sort of literature of how do you teach how to write? Because what I found is it's one thing to say write an essay, it's another to get kids to actually write an essay. And the more, and you don't know what you don't know until you start doing it, you get a product back. And fortunately, those early kids, we had a great relationship and they were willing to try. And I'd look at what they did and I thought, I am not doing a good job as a teacher because nobody knows what to do. And I realized I hadn't taught them how to do things. So then it's the question of how do I do that? So that's my background. And after 12 years, and I have literally now taught hundreds of students, and writing has always been a part of what I've taught in these classes, I've just noticed a lot of patterns. So everything we're going to talk about today is my experience, but it's also coupled with, I've done a ton of research, pedagogical research. What are the innovative professors and writing teachers in the public school system? There's always those people developing how do we teach it in the public school system. So I've spent time in both. So I don't want people to think I'm just saying what worked for my 4 kids. This is really beyond that. So how do you teach your kids to write is like
Yes.
a really big question.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and
Yeah. So let's actually start by getting really clear on what we mean by when we say, I want to teach my kid, I need to teach my kids how to write.
yes.
The reality is, unless you are like you're a family of writers or creative, you have an author in your family,
Mhm.
most likely what you mean is I need to teach my kids need to learn how to write an essay, right? There's sort of this inherent, will they be able to write when they move back into a system that asks them to write to prove what they've learned? And that's the purpose of sort of an essay type writing or other
Mhm.
nonfiction writing, is to communicate what we're thinking
Mhm.
and then deliver it to someone. And in college or in high school, the goal was then the professor or the teacher would look at it and say, all right, you can think, you're a critical thinker, and you can articulate what we've talked about in class,
Mhm.
right? Those were usually the two goals. So I think it's interesting that when we say, I need to teach my kids how to write, what we're really saying is, I need to teach my kids how to write a specific type of content.
Right.
And so before we get into how you do that, because there are some ways to focus on that, I just want to make kind of a plug for the fact that if we only focus on that, we lose what power writing also has for
Mhm.
students and for our kids. So writing at its very core is a form of expression, right?
Mhm.
And it's a form of expression in lots of different ways, whether a student's writing poetry. Sorry, I say students because I teach students as well as
Sure.
my own. We're talking about kids. So whether kids are writing poetry, creative stories, or they're writing an essay or an opinion piece or a book report or a book review, it doesn't matter. The goal of a writing assignment is to say what's inside of you, whether it's in your heart or your head, and how can you put that in a place where other people can then experience it.
Mhm.
And I think when we broaden that, it allows us to step back from, am I teaching the 5-paragraph essay, which has a place?
Mhm.
It's a little controversial, but I think it has a place. And it says, are we teaching our children the very valuable skill of being able to express themselves in such a
Mhm.
way that other people can hear their thoughts? So
Well,
I just
and
wanted to say that.
no, and I appreciate that. I think I heard Dr. Jordan Peterson speak last year, and that was one of the things that he spoke about towards the end. Is he said, he's like, people have got to be able to really articulate their thoughts, and there's no better way to do that than becoming a proficient writer, that you can articulate what you're thinking, and it forces you to do that, which is why it's so important that children learn to write and articulate. And whether it's an essay or it's a fiction story or it's a, they're writing a nonfiction book or whatever. So I appreciate that. And I love that you went broad with that. I think that's good.
Yeah. And inherently built into that is, if we need to teach our kids at any age how to be able to
Mhm.
take their thoughts and put them on paper, it's a little bit like saying to a child who is just learning to walk, you need to know how to play a sport. And you can pick any sport you want, or you need to be able to dance. If you get out on your bike and you ride a bicycle, you don't
Mhm.
think about all the things and all the steps you took to learn the bicycle. You just get on the bicycle. If you go out and you shoot hoops or you play pickleball, you don't think about all the things you're doing to be able to do that. You just play pickleball, right? Or whatever. And a dance is the same way. I mean, we obviously watch our cute little 3, 4, 5-year-olds sometimes dancing, and it's so cute. And then you watch someone who's proficient at 18 or a professional, and it's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And we know that there are steps along the way, but we don't necessarily appreciate all of those things. Writing is the same way. To be able to articulate your thoughts, to clarify them, and then to put them on paper is actually incredibly difficult.
Mhm.
And it requires pulling together an entire basket of skills into one thing. And so one of the challenges, I think, when it comes with writing is we often think that the kids should be able to just do all of the things at once.
Mhm.
And instead, one of the things that I have found is really helpful is if we can break apart the skill sets into different categories and kind of focus on them independently, then we can help all kids thrive. And this is why you will have a kid who is the best storyteller on the planet. They can go on and on and on, keeping you riveted about how the toy trucks did this with the stuffed animal, and they go on. And then the minute you say, okay, write a story, they freeze.
Hmm.
And you're like, I know you have stories in you, and they freeze.
Yeah.
Or you'll have a kid who, this exists because I know, because my son was like this, even though it's rare, you'll have a kid who loves to write their letters, loves to write their letters. But you say, write a creative story, and they freeze because they have a hard time they're not storytellers, right?
Yeah.
So, and by extension, that's often why it's easier to get kids to be creative, write creative stories before it is to write nonfiction, because it's a different type of thinking. So I'm getting ahead of myself. What I want to do is kind of just break down how writing fits into different categories.
Perfect.
And then what we can do is we can talk about how doing these independently, especially at the elementary ages, really frees you up to identify where your child might have a weakness, so that you can support the weakness without squashing the parts that they are doing well. Because anytime you have your kid and you give them something and let's say there's 4 or 5 skills that we have to do to be able to write. And I know I'm teasing your listeners, we will get there. So there's 4 or 5 skills. And there's one that this kid can't do. Well, that one keeps them from wanting to write at all, which means that instead of saying, you're a great writer, you just have this one piece that's hard for you, and they say, oh, I'm a writer, I just have to work on this piece, they say, I'm not good at writing.
Yeah,
and the
they throw
minute
out the whole thing.
Says, right, I'm not good at writing, it's the same thing with math, right? The minute they think I'm not good at something, you have a very different battle you're fighting. But if we can keep them feeling like they are writers from very young ages, then when you start to get to those harder skills like writing essays, you're not also trying to overcome the roadblocks they've put in place that says, I'm no good at this, so why try? And I promise your teenagers that is so easy for them to fall into that, right? So we're going to start with just the basic skills of writing that happen at the elementary ages. And I don't love a lot of curriculum. Some curriculum do a good job pulling this apart. I don't love a lot of curriculum because it still puts a lot of these together. And so you can see a first grader shutting down, and it always breaks my heart because I'm like, oh, there's a writer in there. There's a writer in there. Don't shut them down. So the first category is ideas. Can you just generate an idea that never existed before? Now, this takes a lot of forms, right? This takes the form of creative idea story, right? New story about unicorns and fluffy bears and the toy truck that all went on a party together, right? And it may not have story structure and sound like a good story, but if a kid is talking about a dream, they're a storyteller. So ideas. And then also nonfiction ideas are things like summarizing a day or summarizing a trip. Can they just talk about the things that happen to them? And some kids are better at that than others. And obviously speech is involved from an idea to speaking, but because kids practice speaking a lot more than writing, it's usually, unless they have very specific disabilities, usually they can articulate their ideas, right? So the first thing we want to do is just get kids telling stories and articulating their thoughts and articulating their ideas, whether it's an idea about why they should be able to get that new pet dog, or why they don't like so-and-so, or why they think peanut butter and jelly is better than a ham sandwich at lunch. Like all of these things turn into writing later on, but it's also the creative ideas, right? And we can enhance that part of writing by feeding them a massive diet of poetry, stories, fiction, and nonfiction. So having them listen to podcasts that are tailored to their ages, having them listening to audiobooks, getting to the point where once they're reading on their own, they're reading, but also, anytime you're spending together as a family where you're reading and reciting poetry together, or you're learning stories, and then also telling your narrative stories. So part of this is you telling your stories from your past and getting your kids excited about them, and then they can tell their stories. All of that is how you build that writing skill. So the next time you're in the car and you're just thinking, I feel like we haven't done anything homeschool related today. If you are doing storytelling in the car, you're doing something school related, because you're building the skill of being able to take an idea and articulate it through words. So that's our very first category.
And so, and in this case, they don't have to write anything. They just have to verbally express it.
Yes, and I want, as we go into these other skills, you'll see why that has to be distinct, even though we start putting them together. So yes,
Gotcha.
if this is not about writing it down, this is actually just about, can I have an idea and can I share it?
Gotcha. Love it.
Okay.
Okay. Ideas is
Okay.
number one.
Ideas is number one. Second is the ability to physically put something either on a piece of paper and then as they get a little bit older, typing on a computer. So we are talking about forming letters and handwriting, or the ability to type letters and words. That's all we're talking about. We're not talking about all the mechanics. I'll get to that in a second. So forming letters. So we think about this as a separate skill early on, right? We think about, oh, I need to do handwriting exercises. Am I going to teach cursive, right? That's kind of a controversial choice here in the homeschool world. Actually, it's in the public school world too. Like, do we teach handwriting? Do we not teach? How much time do I spend on handwriting as opposed to how much time, when do I teach them how to type on a computer? I don't want them to be on screens all the time, but we do need to be digitally literate and we need to be able to type, and can they do all of those things? So that is actually a distinct skill. And one of the reasons we make that a distinct skill is because some kids, that is the roadblock. They have either dysgraphia, which is a form of dyscalculia, where literally forming those letters is so incredibly painful that the idea is here and it's ready to come out, and they literally just cannot form the letters well, and they get stuck. Or as they get older, they just can't write fast enough to capture the ideas, so then they get frustrated. And so that's why sometimes some kids benefit from learning to type earlier, or even doing speech to computer, like the different software that lets you do that. So we want to definitely focus on, but potentially keep separate, the physical act of putting letters and words on paper or on a screen separate from ideas. So that's the second one, is the physical skill of forming content.
Love it. And this isn't like I'm writing my story down. It's just like I am writing some words down, and can I form the word cat?
Yeah.
Can I type it?
And we're not talking about spelling. We're literally just talking, can I do some version of a phonetic cat, right? I say that because my dyslexic kids would go to sound out the word cat and they would go at hamburger. And that's a whole different conversation about why dyslexic kids do that, but it's not spelling. It literally is just, can they write letters and put things like that? So yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, so the third one then is mechanics. And again, these are elementary school skills, and this is separate from ideas and from physical, like the physical ability. This is spelling, capitalization, punctuation, grammar, and obviously grammar comes a little bit later, and it includes things like capitalizing the first letter, putting periods in. The number of kids I see at 12 who still just do one long run-on sentence and don't even put periods in is actually pretty high. You'd be surprised, because I think a lot of us worry about our kids behind in writing, but the reality is there's a lot of 12-year-olds out there who still are just stringing long sets of words together with no stops. Because yeah.
I was just say the sad part is I was in hiring for 20 years and I stopped hiring almost 2 years ago. And I would get cover letters from college graduates where there would be no capitalization, no punctuation, and I thought, oh dear, this is not good. This is not good for our country. Here we
are. For sure. Well, and texting has only exacerbated the issues with punctuation, grammar, and spelling. But so coming back to our elementary school kids, one of the things that's really easy to get caught up in is whether or not kids are spelling correctly. Now, initially, we're super happy with whatever, oh, they wrote that story. And it's like 5 words and you can barely tell what it looks like, right? And that's really great for a 4 or 5-year-old. But then we look at them at 7 or 8, and if the words start to be misspelled, we start to think we're failing as homeschool moms because we're not teaching spelling well enough. And some kids just pick this up, but others struggle. And I'm particularly sensitive to that because dyslexic kids often never get past a 4th grade spelling, but it doesn't matter how hard you try, but the computer will mask it. So we want to keep all of these mechanics separate, because if a kid can practice the skill of taking their ideas and just getting them out, we can deal with all the mechanics later, right? But if they're frozen, and your perfectionist kids are the most likely to be like this, if they're frozen with, it has to look right before I put it down, and then what happens is they stop because they can't figure out the perfect way to put it down. And will it be right? And so we want to keep it separate. So here is an example. I'll give you an example of how a mom can subtly send the signal that it wasn't good enough as a draft. So your kid, you give them a writing assignment, they try, and they give it to you like, what do you think? Or, Mom, I finished my writing assignment. And we're like, oh, I'm so glad you finished. Let's take a look. And you start looking at it, you're like, oh, this is really good. But, oh, you know what? Do you see this word that you missed? We'll just fix that spelling really quick. Or, oh, hey, let's throw a period in here, right? We think we're helping. But what we're really saying is, I'm focusing on the things that you didn't do right.
Oh.
Okay. And it's so easy to do because I promise you, you're an adult. You know how
I just did this.
Yeah, we know how to punctuate. What did we just send the message? We just said, yeah, great job, but, right? Rough drafts, first drafts, which it's really important that we never do a draft and be done. There should always be revision built in, and we have to teach that skill. And when we teach that skill, it depends. I would say early kids, it's less important to teach it because emotionally, they're not always ready to do revision yet. But first drafts, especially if the kid was doing it on their own, right? Like, especially if it wasn't an assignment, but even if it was, the first thing we say, and I believe the only thing we say is, wow, let me tell you all the things that I love about this. And then I focus on the kid's effort, I focus on their ideas, or I focus on something I feel. There are 3 very clear ways that we can appreciate things. Like, oh man, when I read, and I do this with all of my students because I have a lot of students who show up and they're worried about their spelling or their handwriting or it's not good enough. Oh, it's not good enough. I'm like, no. Some are better than others, right? I can find a word that I love. I can find a couple words that are just so cool the way they combine them. Or I can say, oh, wow, this is a cool idea. I love this idea. Do you see, like, this reminds me of this story and this story, but you tweaked it. Or if they are doing a handwriting exercise, you're like, wow, look at those 3 A's that are amazing. And you ignore the 15 others that are like, whoa, all over the place, right? There's a place for that. But when we spend our energy telling these kids what they do well when they first show up with something, we send the message, your first try is exactly what it's supposed to be. And then later on down the road in a variety of settings, we can then say, here's how you can upgrade. Here's where we're going to improve. Second try, revision, all of those things. There is a place for that. Believe me, I'm not saying first draft enough, but it is so easy to see the mistakes. And I think in addition to just seeing them, and so we naturally go there, there's also this latent, like undergirding fear that like, if I don't correct it, they won't get better. Or if I don't correct it, then they're going to fail later on. Like there's always that fear that we're not catching enough as a parent. And I would say we do more damage by correcting too soon and not celebrating all the things that are doing well. Now, not like I haven't reinforced this enough already, but I'm going to give you an example and I'm going to tell you a story. So I decided I wanted to learn how to make bread when I was probably in my 30s. And I'm not a good cook. I never learned to cook when I was growing up. I lived off macaroni and cheese and canned chili all the way through college, and ramen, of course. So I never cooked. I got married. It turns out I'm not naturally a good cook, so it was actually really hard to learn. There were a gazillion mistakes, but for a variety of reasons, I decided I want to learn how to make bread. So I'm learning how to make bread, and my first effort is really bad, like brick, will hold the door open bad. And I put it on there, and I know it's not good. I know it doesn't look like bread. And one of my kids, and they're kids, so I'm not even upset by this, but one of them was like, oh, that wasn't very good, Mom. And I'm like, I know.
Thank you.
Right? You're like, I'm sure we've all had these experiences, right? And there was this moment in this where I was like, why do I even try? Like, this is so hard. This is way harder than every YouTube video I watched made it look, and every book I read that's like, make bread and all this stuff. And the kids comment, it's like I had to catch myself as a 30-something adult, right? Lots of years of maturity, fully formed brain, and say to myself, no, I can try again. Now it was like 45 batches later, because I'm very stubborn, that I finally got to the point where I was making bread well enough that my kids, like, we could actually eat it as a family. And they got better at not saying, like, well, this one's better, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, kids.
Yeah. But if everybody, if you think about something when you're trying it for the first time, you know all the problems, or you don't even know all the problems. You just know it's not good. And all you want to hear is, this is good enough that it's worth trying again. And I think as adults, we forget how it feels unless we can pull a reference point from something that we've had where we're like, please don't tell me I failed. Just please tell me I succeeded. Or maybe we can pull on that one example where someone said, keep going, you've got something here. So that's why we don't want to focus on the mistakes.
Yeah.
And why we want to separate things.
I love that.
Okay.
Well, and our brains are developed and theirs are not, and we're still feeling that way. So
yeah,
I love that. Anyway.
And, it bleeds into all areas of life. The more we focus on what people are doing well, the more they will continue to do that well. And then we can talk about upgrades. And I usually don't talk about mistakes. I usually talk about upgrading. I usually say, and this is how I say it to all my students, I say, you know what? Think about that first cell phone you owned. And most of these kids, or your first cell phone you ever saw. And maybe this doesn't work with my 12-year-olds, but it certainly works with my 17-year-olds. I say, and then someday you decided you wanted a new phone. And it's not because the old phone wasn't functional, but the new phone was better. And so you decided to upgrade your phone. It doesn't mean I wasn't really grateful for the years I spent with my iPhone 3, but I really like my iPhone 15, right? So upgrading is a really positive way to say, love what you had here, let's upgrade it to the next level instead of mistakes you need to fix, right? There's a place to talk that way too, but.
I love that. I love that. That's so great.
The more we talk about upgrades, the more it's, you're great the way you are, and let's take you to the next level. And the more kids can learn to hold both of those in their head at the same time, the more we just help them grow up to be healthy adults. So
love that.
Okay. So we've covered 3. We've covered ideas. We've covered physical. We've covered mechanics. The fourth one that we want to talk about in elementary writing is structure. And structure starts with sentences and turns into paragraphs. So ideally, if you're really on top of things, and we'll talk about this in just a second, if you're not, your kid can write a paragraph and understands how paragraphs work by the end of elementary school, 5th, 6th grade, depending on how you're structuring things, right? And I get that everybody's different with grades and things like that. But so, I think it's pretty obvious. Sentence structure is, do you know where to put those stops in? Do you understand that sentences have subjects and verbs? Do you understand that they're one complete thought? Do you understand that paragraphs are when we transition from one thought to another thought, or it's when one person's speaking and then another person's speaking, or you've shifted the scene in your creative story. And that really is a much later skill. I would be most lower and middle elementary school kids, that's just not where they are. They're still looking to form sentences and try to figure out, but you can start talking about it and point things out, right? So those are the 4 that we're looking at. So going back to the idea at the very beginning, you want to break all 4 of those apart and give each of them time separately. And sentences and paragraphs flow naturally after mechanics are covered. But if a kid gets stuck on spelling and all you do is like, we got to fix your spelling, we've got to fix your spelling, we've got to fix your spelling, and they're ready in every other way to move on to the mechanics or the structure of sentences and paragraphs, don't stop on spelling. Right? Like we can get them structuring their paragraphs independent of those sorts of things. And then the value of this is some kids, and my son was like this, he just understood how all 4 came together. He learned how to read when he was really young. He picked it up, I think, between 4 and 5, kind of on his own. He just kind of intuitively understood. And those are the kids who were like, oh, that was easy. I taught him how to write. And suddenly they were just like writing little stories and they have paragraphs. You're like, oh, and then you get a kid who can't do something and you're like, what's wrong? And it's usually because we need to split something out and figure out, oh, they have dysgraphia. How can I help them? Or they're really getting perfectionistic on their spelling and their punctuation. So we're just going to do, whether you call them quick writes or free writes or barfing on paper, depending on your personality and how you want to talk to your kids. You're like, I want you to just throw it on paper and nothing is fixed. And you're just going to do that and move on. Like, it doesn't matter what it looks like as long as your hand is moving for 2 minutes, right? Like there's all these ways that we can kind of split it out. Or maybe they're struggling with the structure in the writing. If you have a kid with ADHD and they struggle with organization, and some kids with autism are the same way, like just being able to organize your ideas is so hard, right? So, but they're super creative. So let's manage and support as we teach them how to get that structure into their writing while so writing time is really all about storytelling. And then later on, we're like, okay, I know this part's hard. 5 minutes. Or can you just give me 3 things in order? And we start working with organization and structure separately from storytelling. And the idea, again, is that if you see a kid struggling, you're making sure you're celebrating what they do well. And you're saying, oh, you are a great writer because you have such good ideas. Or I love how beautiful your handwriting is, or whatever, independent of the things that you're working on managing, upgrading, and supporting. Okay. All right. That is our elementary school level.
Okay.
And you'll notice I did not talk about book reports. I did not talk about 5-paragraph essays. I did not talk about those things because I feel strongly that those really are designed for higher level thinking. And you're just treading, I feel like it's not that kids can't do it earlier, but I'm not sure there's value in it because they're going to pick it up later if they have those fundamental skills. And what you're really doing is saying, please write that boring report about your dog. And the kid doesn't want to write about their dog, right? Like you really want to, I think you talked about being an eclectic unschooler kind of ish, right? And that's where those elementary ages are about nurturing and following their loves and passions and really helping them know that they feel that way. So we don't want to throw a bunch of boring writing assignments at them until they get a little bit older and they can appreciate the value of I'm doing this for other reasons. And they can understand that it's because I'm developing and preparing skills to move forward. So.
Well, and I even look at my 8-year-old, and right now she is all about writing down all of the stories in her head as best as she can and asking us how to spell words all the time, which her brother said, just look it in the dictionary. And she's like, but I don't know how to spell it. So how am I going to find it in the dictionary? Right. And so we're like, okay, we'll just help you spell it. But it's interesting because I'm like, I don't want to squelch and squash that desire to get all of her stories out on paper. You know, I don't want to do that. And I think in the past I have squelched that. And so now I'm like, nope, I'm stepping back. And now I'm seeing the repercussions with my now 12-year-old son going, okay, he doesn't want to write. And that's partially my fault because I was still like, well, look at all these mistakes. So I really appreciate what you had to say. Okay. So going to the older kids.
Yes. Oh, teenagers. They're so much fun. I love teenagers. I teach teenagers. They're delightful. And I also like to think of them, you know how butterflies, caterpillars go into the cocoon and then they become like mush and then they like come out as butterflies. They don't just go in and become a butterfly. They become this mushy, gloopy, whatever. So I like to think of teenagers as mushy gloop. And I just got to love the mushiness, and then they become butterflies on the other side. So as long as we know what we're dealing with, the expectations, I mean, being a teenager is really hard. I think it's harder now. And even if we're homeschooling, just the number of things that are happening internally with a teenager as they figure out how to separate from their parents, as they figure out who they are, as they figure out all of these things, we can nurture that, or we can end up in a battle of wills all the time. And it really has a lot, so writing is just one way that we're going to interact with our teenagers, but it is one where you're probably going to have some a little bit of the tension, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's not fun. I like to say to my students, I used to say to my kids, look, writing is hard. It is not easy. If it were easy, everybody could just do it, right? It is not a skill that you're just born knowing how to do. And no good writer, no published author is just creating great work. It is hard work. And because it's hard work, you're going to feel all the wrestle that comes from hard work, right? So you should expect to have it feel hard. And that's one of the reasons we want to wait to kind of pull some of these upper, more critical thinking ideas till they're older, because it is hard. And if we're trying to ask them to do things before they're ready to do them, then it's kind of an exercise in futility. So, okay. So here are some additional things that we start to pull in as we get into secondary writing. And when I say secondary, we're talking 12 through 18, right? Okay. And a 12-year-old is going to be practicing in a different way than a 17-year-old is going to be practicing. And I think that's important to remember too, that our 13-year-olds are not expected to suddenly be doing the same things as a 15 or a 16-year-old. They're just at different developmental stages. Okay. Number 1, drafting and revision. Okay. Again, I said sometimes there's value in doing that in those early stages, but your daughter who's 8, do you want to tell her that she needs to go revise that story, or is this just the process of creation, especially because it's her story, right? No, drafting and revision is hard work. It's a very specific set of things you have to think about. At first I have to know enough to fix it, right? What am I going to do? I have to have the emotional maturity to look at something and say, I didn't create something beautiful in day one, and now
Yeah.
I'm going to upgrade it. There is emotional maturity that says I'm going to go back and revisit that, right? I'm exploring, what does revision mean for me? Is it because I haven't really thought through an idea? Because the older kids, it's how, we're hoping to get them to the point where they can actually look at their essay arguments and say, is that a really good argument? Or are you really telling me what that quote means? Or are you just kind of regurgitating plot? Whatever it is, like, do they have the skills to do that revision piece? And we'll talk, it's actually two separate skills to be able to do that. But drafting or revision is just, can you find how you want to say things? Do you know how you what is your tone? And things like, do you write in passive voice instead of active voice? And, learning how to switch those things, all of that. So drafting revision is one.
Okay.
And it is a skill, and it takes emotional maturity. And some kids are just more willing to do it than others. But I do not know a human alive who's like, woohoo, I get to work on that again. It's just not fun most of the time. Maybe they're out there, and if your listeners can message in and be like, actually, I love revising, and then I want to meet them.
I've never met those people.
Yeah, I feel like it's a tough skill. Okay, so that's the first one. And the second one kind of dovetails with what I was saying. It's analysis. It's being able to have an original thought, and it's more than ideas, right? It's like, I'm looking at something, and now I'm going to have an idea about that thing. So if we're asking them to write about a speech that they've read, let's say they've studied Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and you want them to respond to that speech with some kind of essay. Like, tell me, what are key points he made? Or how do his key points interact with other things that were happening in the civil rights movement? Or how does this speech match, if we look at this versus the Constitution, right? There's all kinds of things we do in history. Or maybe it's, we've read a book. I'm going to pick something that almost everyone tends to read. We read The Hiding Place. And that's more history, but I've seen it read a lot in English classes too. And now we want the kids to talk about the literary quality of the book. I am not going to pick The Hiding Place because that's a memoir. Let's do Animal Farm. It's a controversial book that a lot of kids read. We're going to talk about the characters, and we're going to talk about what they symbolize and what it's a fable about animals who take over a farm, but it represents the Russian Revolution, right? So we're like, let's talk about these different characters. Were they right? Were they wrong? How did this character do this? Or maybe we're going to talk about repetition in the story, right? There's all kinds of things we can talk about. Analysis is being able to talk about that, to be able to look at a piece of writing and then give us our own thoughts. Now, we do that in discussion in classes or with our kids all the time. Now, let's talk about that. It is very different to talk about something, as we've already said, than it is to put those thoughts in writing. And that is one of the hardest things to be able to do. But they have to actually be able to have those thoughts that are often you can kind of feel the answer and then putting it in an articulated way. Like, here's actual words that someone else can read. And you can see this is one of those key ideas that moves our students into the ability to be successful in a variety of places, whether it's college or work, or they want to join the great conversation with blogs and essays and things like that, is the ability to have their own ideas and put them down in a way. So analysis is independent of drafting and revision, obviously, because we have to have our ideas. I probably should have started with that, original ideas, and then we have to be able to revise them. So those two. The third one is, can we organize our ideas in a way that makes sense? So this is an outgrowth of, sentences and paragraphs, which is organizing on a small level, but it is much bigger when we get into college.
Yeah.
Or not college, into middle school and high school. Can I write some version of a 5-paragraph essay? Which, the reason 5-paragraph essays exist and why it's so controversial is no one in the real world writes 5-paragraph essays. If you open a magazine with an essay, or you read a literary piece, an op-ed in a newspaper, nobody's writing 5-paragraph essays. Right. 5-paragraph essays are good for two reasons. They're a scaffold to teach kids how to put their writing into an organized structure. It gives them a scaffolding. And I'm a big believer in scaffolding, because then you pull the scaffolding away and they're ready to do more. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, honestly, it's just really much easier for teachers to grade. Like, if I'm an English teacher and if I'm in public school and I've got 110 of these to read, I can go to the thesis statement, I can go find their 3 points, I can skim that thing, I can grade it in 5 minutes, right? Right. And so part of it is literally just the mechanics of how much public school teachers have to do. And it is that structure that serves as scaffolding. So I believe there's value in it, but I always tell my students and my kids, I always said, look, this is a means to an end. Once you know how to play all your scales on the piano, and once you know how to play certain kinds of songs, you know that certain types of patterns, then you can go break all the rules in your own compositions, right?
Yeah. But you have to
writing.
know the rules in order to break the rules.
Right. And so whether you're talking about a thesis statement, or you're talking about a central concept, or you're talking about a so what, you have to be able to say, what is the main idea of the piece I'm trying to write? What am I trying to say? And then we just give them structure to do that. Now, creatively, and I really believe that we do our teenagers a disservice when we pull creative writing out of their curriculum. We get so worried. Will they be able to write an essay? That we don't keep asking them to write poetry. We don't keep asking them to write creative fiction. And we don't ask them to write personal narratives. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. Nobody needs more ability to figure out what the heck is going on inside and then articulate that, give it words, than a teenager.
That's true.
So, right?
That's true. I've never thought about that, but that is true.
Poetry gives a kid a way to voice feelings. Poetry is the language of feelings and emotions. Memoir, personal narrative, which frankly is just college essay, application essays. So there is value for other reasons too. But personal narratives if you've ever read a memoir, it's not just telling the story of what happened, but it's giving meaning to a story. Mm-hmm. So if a 15-year-old, I'll give you an example. This is something I had the kids I'm teaching do this year. I had a 15-year-old write a story about a hike he went on, and he was talking about how he's so frustrated because everybody was slow, and he's just like, and then it was like but then finally everybody got to the top and it was fine. And his first was just, that was kind of it. He just kind of told the story. And I looked at him and I said, okay, you picked this for a reason. Why does it matter to you? What did you learn in this experience? And the final draft, I thought he was going to talk about, we accomplished this thing together. You know, hiking mountains tends to have that feeling, right? Like we got there and we were all together. But what he said in the ending of his narrative was, he changed it because he needed to include other pieces to get here. He's like, I slowed down and I hiked with the slowest hiker. And I learned that sometimes it's not about getting to the destination, but it's who you hike with along the way. And it's about being with the slower person and knowing that sometimes it's not about me, it's about them.
Wow.
15-year-old kid. He couldn't even articulate that when he first wrote that story, but he knew he'd learned something.
Yeah.
Those narratives, over and over and over again, I watch these teenagers come up with mind-blowing ahas from their life because we give them a vehicle to have that happen. Personal narratives are so important. In fact, I would argue that is probably the most powerful thing you can give, is the tool to be able to assess how I feel about something that's happened in my life. Your teenagers will do that for the rest of their lives. They may never write another essay after they get out of college. They may never go on to do a lot of writing in their jobs. If they go home and they raise a family, it's not like as a mom, I was like sitting down and writing, essays about what I learned in my bread making. I'm not a blogger, right? Mm-hmm. But we're always coming up with what happened in my life. Here's a story. What did I learn? Did this have meaning to me? Everyone does that for the rest of their life. So if we give them a vehicle to learn how to do that, they're better at doing it and they can give more meaning to the experiences they're going through.
I love that. Well, and I think about that because like my, now he's about to turn 18. He doesn't like to write, but funny enough, he took college courses, passed with flying colors, straight A's, English composition 1 and 2 without a problem, and his other courses, writing. But he's never liked writing until I gave him a journal earlier this year. And he started journaling just his thoughts, his feelings, the things that have been frustrating him, things that he's been learning. And now he told me yesterday, he's like, Mom, now I write every single day. And I didn't think I liked writing, but I actually really like writing. I just like writing what I like to write. I'm like, you're doing something. I'll take it, So
Well, and I think that's the point, is that we start to pigeonhole writing as one type of thing. And so
Mhm.
he's like, well, I didn't think I liked to write because I don't write essays, right?
Yeah.
Who likes okay, there are only
Nobody likes to write essays.
well, the only people who like to write essays become college professors. In my opinion, that's what I've discovered. You should not be a college professor unless you like a humanities college professor,
Right.
unless you like to write essays. Those people do.
Legitimately.
Most of us don't, but I had not written poetry for years, and that's something I've been dabbling in the last couple of years as I've been getting into teaching it to my students, and I'm discovering I really enjoy writing poetry. It was not something I hadn't written since high school, and I was like, oh, that's something that emo high school students do, is they just write their poetry. And I'm like, oh, now that I understand it. So I think there's more of a writer in almost all of us than we realize, but it's also what's the form. And maybe we don't like putting it to paper, but we like generating ideas, or maybe we like organizing lists. I think lists are a form of writing too. So, okay, last one. And this one really is kind of like a comprehensive across the board. So we've already covered kind of the categories, is just motivation is independent, I think, of all the skills. Do I want to? Do I feel overwhelmed? Am I ready to do the hard work of taking my thinking and putting it on paper? Do I see the value of it? With teenagers, sometimes it's about having somebody else in the process and not mom, who's the one they're accountable to. Some are really motivated by having a deadline. Some are motivated by having a grade. Grades are kind of an ugly word in the homeschool community, depending on who you are. But honestly, some kids are just motivated by, there is actually something at the end that I'm going to receive. And just learning the process. All of that is about the emotional maturity of, am I ready to do the hard work?
Yeah.
And finding the right formula for your kid is, I think, as much of the process of teaching them how to write. Some will do just fine with a curriculum that you find, that you bring home. There are some wonderful, like, at-home self-paced writing curriculums. There really are. And it's less about finding the perfect one, and it's more about finding the one that seems to like resonate with your kid. Other kids, it's about finding a class that they are actually going to engage in, and because they need the social accountability and they need the teacher accountability. And so there are not a lot of homeschool moms who, by the time we get up into like chemistry and physics, we're like, I'm doing that by myself, unless they're really an expert. I don't think we should feel like we're in charge of teaching our kids how to write after a certain stage, if that's not something that we are like sold on. And if you're not feeling capable. So the other thing about writing that's kind of interesting is it's so subjective about what makes it better, that unless you have some training on what to look for and like how to break it down into steps, I actually think it's not like math where the kid can go check the answers. I think it is something where having someone who knows writing to be able to look and help your kid, it is a skill area where if you're feeling like you don't have that skill set, it's probably a good idea to find someone who does as the kids get older. Do you need someone in 4th grade? No, you do not. Yeah. Do you need someone when they're 7th grade? Maybe. Would I be looking for someone by about 8th, 9th, 10th if I didn't feel like I was the right combination? Absolutely. And then I would strongly look for something that does both the essay writing, the narrative writing, and the poetry. Like, I'll put narrative and poetry and creative kind of like in those two buckets. Like, I would really, if I go on my one big soapbox, it's that we need our teenagers doing both. And a lot of curriculum kind of goes one way or the other. And you'll get, if your kid wants to write a novel, come be in this creative writing class, or come learn how to write essays and do research papers. And research papers are a different skill set too, right? Researching is separate. And if you're looking for just English as opposed to like cherry picking different classes, then I would say look for something that does all those things. Or focus on one year, focus on another year, right? Like do creative writing 1 year, do something that's a little bit more nonfiction, like a literary analysis discussion type class another year. Please don't just put your kid in history classes with writing assignments and say that's English. That's not enough to teach a kid how to write. And I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm just speaking from this side of the story versus when my kid was 12. And a lot of people in my community said that was enough. Like, well, they write in their history class, and that's not enough. There's just so much more to do with writing. So I think it, but we can also be worried that they're not doing all kinds of writing all years. So I think that we are okay splitting it up and looking for different things, different years. Every kid's different.
Yeah.
So anyway,
I love
so
it.
there we go. We teach writing, and then beyond that, we're just looking for. I mean, I don't know if you want me to run down like a really. I just have some writing tips. Do you want me to just run?
Yes.
I
Let's
feel
hear
like
it.
your readers are like my brain, or your listeners. My brain is so full. But here we go, really quick. If these are kind of my general writing things. One, frequency matters. So just writing a lot matters as opposed to one writing assignment a year, but less is more. So if you are like, I believe that an analysis paragraph is as powerful as an analysis essay most of the time. Like we just give kids essays because that feels like what we should do when in fact we want them to learn the process. So by breaking it up, essays are structure, analysis is paragraph, right? Like we can break those things up. But just getting them writing a lot is a great idea. Second, ideas always trump structure. So we need to teach structure. We need to teach how to do, where's your thesis? Like, can you structure ideas in paragraphs? Is one idea per paragraph? However you want to do it. But ideas always trump structure. And I would always push and celebrate your ideas and worry about structure later, because you can get kids to kind of like follow a framework, but ideas are harder to like articulate. So focus on ideas first. My next tip is real audiences actually matter, especially as kids get older. So if you have the energy and are inclined fighting writing contests, fighting opportunities to be writing in a setting where students will or kids will be sharing with each other, creating little writing groups when they're younger can be really fun. Publishing a book that you're going to share, like, wouldn't it be fun if I never did this? So this is one of those things where I can give an idea, but I don't want the homeschool moms to go, oh, I'm failing because I'm not doing that either. I never did this, but it's a really cool idea. Have every kid write a narrative about some cool thing that happened in their life that year, bind it all together and give it to grandma as a Christmas present, right? So it's not just a photo book, but it's also them all writing a story about something they did that year. What a great audience beyond themselves, right? But again, I never did that, but it's a cool idea. Okay.
It's a great idea. I think it's a great idea.
Always encourage creativity. Following forms, teaching forms allows you to be creative. It gives a framework to be creative in, but always encourage creativity. I think as we move forward in the world, creativity is going to trump structure. AI can write the most beautiful ninth grade 5-paragraph essay. I mean, if you ask them to write an essay on Macbeth, AI can write an essay on Macbeth, and you very much cannot tell. It's actually better than most ninth graders.
Yeah.
AI cannot be creative the way humans can be creative. So creativity, I think, is one of the skills we want to enhance in our students so that they're able to be competitive in the world they're going into. Finally, I talked about motivation. Of course, it's wonderful if your students and your children are motivated and they're like, I just will write because you've asked me to. And I know it's a good thing. Not even you've asked me to, but I know I need to learn this. And that way I will be a good writer in college. And every once in a while you get a kid that's like that. And I hope you just realize how lucky you are, because those kids do exist and they have their own issues, but they're just wonderful to teach.
Yeah.
The most of kids are not going to be like that. And it is okay, not when they're 5 and not when they're 8, but because you're dealing with this in things like, will you just please change your underwear? And yes, we have to take a bath a couple times a week. And when they're 12 and you're dealing with a boy who's 12 and you're picking between please shower and please do your writing assignment, I'm going to always pick please shower, because I only get so many things a day before like our relationship breaks down. And I think showering is more important.
Or wearing socks with their tennis shoes.
Yeah, we're just working with those 12 and 13-year-olds on basic hygiene and why it matters. And so we're picking and choosing. But it is okay to say, you need to do this because you need to do this. Like, I love internal motivation. And I also believe sometimes you just say, you're not going to practice until you've written a paragraph. And it can be the crappiest paragraph on the planet, but you got to write a paragraph.
But you're going to write the paragraph.
And then you can go. And you can go have a great time. So give me a hard time all you want. But that's after I haven't also said you cannot go to practice. You can't go to practice till you've showered, right? And until you've eaten. Like, just general parenting of teenager tips. Right. I felt like and every kid's a little bit different, but I felt like I got a certain number of ultimatums per day. And depending on the kid, I had to use up those in different ways. And sometimes, and school rarely was at the top of that ultimatum list. Like, until you do X, you don't get to do Y or whatever. Yeah. And so often the homeschooling stuff, the school stuff kind of dropped off. And I was so worried that my kids were going to be failures, because there were days where we never got to things because I was working on basic, like, human kindness. But it turns out that because I kept that ultimatum list small enough that our relationship was always in a good place
Yeah.
for the most part, like I always put relationships first, we could get to the point where then it was, okay, you got to do the writing assignment, right? Like there were fewer of the others, and we hadn't broken all the bridges. I hadn't burned all the bridges with writing or with other assignments by the time, and they all do fine. Like even the ones who barely wrote in high school, I have to help them. I had to help them in college, and they figured it out, and they all are doing fine.
And they're
It's just,
good.
and it's good. But they, some of them needed a little bit more hand holding help in their first year of college than others, just depending on how much they were willing to practice in high school. So
Yeah.
anyway, so those are some of my tips. Is just, oh, one more. Read, 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 read.
Well, and it's so funny that you say that because right now I have a reading challenge going on with families where it's just read 10 minutes a day out loud to your family for 30 days. Because I
Love
know
it.
for me coming out of the public school world where they're like, yeah, you have to, your kids need to read 20 minutes a day, but reading aloud kind of it was a magical thing when I came into the homeschool world where I'm like, people read to their teenagers? What? What is this sorcery? And and yet it's so delightful, but it's true. Like Andrew Pudua was on several months ago with the Institute for Excellence in Writing, and he talked about that with reading um, that his kids became much better writers because they read so much and they
Yes.
recognized what good writing looks like. So,
Yes, you can't write if you don't have words in your head.
yeah.
One of the biggest, so we always did what I call couch time, right? I had the advantage of all, starting homeschooling, right? So we always did couch time. We always had a book we were reading. As the teenagers got older, if they were home, they were part of that, right? So we read
Mhm.
all kinds of things together. Some of the sweetest memories as a family that we have are from that couch time. And yes, my youngest was a hellion. And he sometimes did couch time from the high chair because he wouldn't leave us alone. Like we could do a whole other podcast on how you manage toddlers and teenagers when they're being that age group. Um, but so reading, just putting enough words in your kid's head that they've heard that. Have they heard beautiful sentences? Have they
Yeah.
heard beautiful description? One of my biggest regrets. So because we have a lot of dyslexia, I had a kid who learned, the one without learned on his own, 5. Like I just kind of put some stuff in front of him. I had a kid who didn't learn to read till she was 8. I had a kid to read no reading till 8.5, despite every effort. And then my youngest did not learn to read till he was 11.5 on his own. So this is not me just unschooling and being like, whenever he figures it out. No, we were consistently
Yeah.
off and on trying to teach him to read. And there were a couple things, but it just took forever. And if I could go back and do anything differently with him, I would have had him listening to audiobooks,
Hmm.
even though he told me he didn't love them, in his room during that time when I would separate all the kids and they would all take some quiet time by themselves. He couldn't read. And so I would just let him play with his Legos or build things because that's what he wanted to do. And he was really good to be there. I didn't put enough words into his head. And so he doesn't have the 8-year-old to 11.5-year-old years when they start to read themselves. And he still doesn't love to read. And I wish I had just said, no, we're still going to just stuff your head full of words.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, we love, love our literature and our children's books in the homeschool world. And we
Yes.
sometimes forget that nonfiction matters.
Yeah.
So finding great podcasts where your kids are hearing well organized ideas structured in a nonfiction way also is a really good idea. And I'm not going to make suggestions because I'm not in the world with 6-year-olds and looking for that stuff right now, but there's
Yeah.
lots of things out there. Don't ignore nonfiction. That's one of the reasons we have a really hard time writing nonfiction and writing essays, is because we actually haven't read a lot. That's
Yeah.
why kids can write stories and they can't write analysis because they haven't read analysis. So the
Well,
more we can just give that, the better off they are.
and I found like with my boys, they preferred, as kids they liked fiction, but like with my 17-year-old and even my 23-year-old, they devour the nonfiction. They devour the personal development books. They just devour
Mhm.
them and they love them. But if I were to ask my 17-year-old now, I want you to go read, this fiction book, he'd be like, why? I'm reading Grit. Like
Yeah.
why would I do that? I really
And
like
Grit's amazing. I love
yeah,
that book, right?
yeah,
Like you're
fantastic books. But I found that with my boys, the older that they got, the more they want to read the nonfiction. They want to read, like, because I think part of it is that it's really great, but the
Mhm.
other part is that they feel big. Like, now I'm an adult and I'm reading stuff by Dan and Chip Heath and the Arbinger Institute,
Yeah,
so
and awesome, right? Because that stuff's amazing, and you have other kids who will never get past Harry Potter, and our goal is
right.
to get them out of Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. I think so. As adults, we get to pick what we enjoy reading, and not
That's true.
everybody says, today I think I will pick up Shakespeare just because I want some light reading." Like no one, like there's certain books you don't just pick up Frankenstein because you want to just have a nice beach read. We pick up the latest romance novel, or we pick up the latest, fantasy book that we want to read. I think as kids get older, especially those teenagers that are moving into college age,
Mhm.
they're going to gravitate to what they're interested in. Some will like to read, some won't. Some will be reading Jane Austen for the 15th time, and
Mhm.
some
That's
will
my
want to
daughter.
read, yeah, and some will want to read personal development. So part of what we're picking in, part of what the purpose of an education is to push people outside of what they like to do all the time, but also honoring and respecting the fact that in free time, we want to be able to do all kinds of things. But an education is not staying in our sort of our lane that we love, but allowing ourselves to recognize there's value in things, even if it's not my
Yeah.
first choice. And as someone who loves to read literature, right? I love it, but I also love personal development, and I just love to read. You also
Mhm.
get people who just love to read. So allowing for agency and recognizing there's nothing wrong with your homeschool or your kid if they really like just one kind of thing. And that's why we say it's okay to say, no, you have to do X, even if you don't love it, because we do want to push them beyond just the natural human tendency to stay in the lane that we like.
Yeah. I love that. Love that. Okay. What's the one piece of advice, like the last piece of advice you'd give to new homeschoolers that will help them
Just in
get
general.
through? Yeah, just in general, like the one big thing where you're like, homeschoolers that are new need to know this.
Okay. I'm actually going to do two because
That I'll take two.
okay. The first one is February is horrid. I don't care. Well, maybe if you live in the southern hemisphere or someplace like Florida where it's like nice all the time. Um, so February, well, even then, February is really hard. In the fall, you have all these breaks. You have Thanksgiving and you have Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas, and like every 3 or 4 weeks, there's like a pause, right? And then you hit January, and for many people, it's cold, it's dark, you're trapped inside, and there are no real holidays that give us a break until April.
Mhm.
And I can't even tell you the number of years it took me to realize that's why I wanted to quit every February 12th. I was like, I'm done. Like, this is hard. Nothing's working. I hate this. What was I thinking? I'm destroying my children. That one was like a bell in my head all the time. February, you're taking all of your Valentine's Day chocolate and you're like hiding in the closet, and you're like, everyone just go away because I'm a failure as a homeschool mom. I'm a failure as a mom, and you guys can just do whatever you want today. I don't know a single homeschool mom who does not hit that at some point between the end of January and the beginning of March. And so the first tip is you're normal. It's going to happen. It happens even to people who've been doing it for 10, 12, 15 years. It is certainly going to happen at the beginning. And you just get through it. And part of the way you get through it is maybe you give yourself spring break in February. I think spring break should always happen in February. Maybe you shake it up and do a week of really cool movies. You read a book and you watch a movie. Maybe you go on a field trip every day, like whatever's like lights you up as a homeschool mom, and your kids will go along with. Those are not always the same thing. Whatever makes you happy as a homeschool mom, that's what you do mid-February.
I
And
love
it
that.
will pick back up. So that's the first thing. And the second thing I already touched on, but I think it is, in my opinion, the number one thing that makes it so that when you get up to the end of your homeschool journey, you look back and it is a celebrated thing. And you can celebrate it, and the relationships are so amazing. And it is putting relationships above academics.
Hmm.
We are so worried we're going to fail our kids. We're so worried they're not going to get into college. We're so worried that we're not keeping up or whatever. and you've had a train wreck of a day and all of these things. And raising teenagers, but even, it doesn't matter the age, raising kids is hard. As a mom, raising kids and dad, it's hard, right? So now we've layered a whole another set of responsibility on top of that. So it's even harder. And all those fears that go along with it. And inevitably, it makes it so getting the assignment done, making them do all their homework, making sure they finish things, making sure whatever it is, we can get into these power struggles. And it becomes about making them do that thing. And I promise you, what ends up on the other side is a kid who doesn't see you as someone who's on their side. You are always on in a fight. Even if you're not fighting, they're just like, what's the next thing we're going to fight about? They get super defensive, right? If you always prioritize the relationship, always, and I mean, there are rare exceptions, but we're talking 99.9% of the time you err on the side of relationship, then when things get really hard in the teenage years, and I mean really hard, because any mom with teenagers will tell you this is not a walk in the park. They can still see you as on their side. You're two people. They're trying to get through their mushy butterfly cocoon stage. And you're there saying, I'm here to be your helper. I'm on your side and we're going to figure out this really hard thing together. And they see you as someone that they can come to talk to. They see you as someone that when you counsel them in those moments when they're ready to listen, they can hear you. They see you as an advocate, a cheerleader. You're the one they can trust that you're there for them, which is the number one thing a teenager needs to know, because they don't even know if they're there for themselves. They need to know someone has to be there for them even when they're failing and they feel like they're falling apart. And you cannot be that if you are prioritizing, are you writing that essay over whether or not you're doing okay today? And if I have to have a really hard conversation about the fact that you may have been doing something on your phone that I told you was not okay, or you know is not okay, then that's the hard conversation we're having. I don't want to have a hard conversation about writing too, right? So that is actually my number one thing. Always prioritize relationships over academics.
I love it. Toriann, thank you so much for coming and sharing all your knowledge. It has been such a delight. Mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you are doing so much better than you think you are. You got this. We'll talk next week. If you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe. You could also join our private Facebook group at School to Homeschool, or sign up for our newsletter at www.schooltohomeschool. Have a great day.